In the darkest recesses of European history, where ambition and betrayal coil together like serpents, few tales are as devastating as that of a queen entombed not by enemies, but by her own kin. This isn't a story of medieval dungeons or brutal foreign wars. It's far more chilling, because it was all done in the name of love, family, and duty. Joanna of Castile, remembered by history as Joanna the Mad, wasn't labeled insane by doctors. That judgment came from those who feared her power, her own father, husband, and son. Her real offense wasn't madness. It was being a woman with a rightful claim to one of Europe's mightiest thrones. For nearly 5 decades, Joanna would be held captive, watching helplessly as the people closest to her stripped away her freedom, her legacy, and eventually, her identity. She was born in 1479 into a world already defined by ambition and ruthless strategy. Joanna's parents were none other than Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon, the Catholic monarchs who unified Spain and drove the Moors from Granada. But in their court, children weren't cherished for their own sake. They were pawns, valuable pieces in a high-stakes geopolitical chessboard. What makes Joanna's story especially unsettling isn't just the cruelty she endured, but the calculated and sophisticated way it was carried out. This wasn't the barbarism of some tyrant with a whip. It was psychological warfare, legal manipulation, and propaganda. The kind of subtle, systemic control that dictators would perfect in centuries to come. The castle of Tordesillas, where Joanna spent the final years of her life, still stands today. It's a silent monument to one of the most heartless betrayals in royal history. Within those walls, a queen destined to rule a global empire was reduced to a prisoner, silenced, broken, and eventually forgotten. But the truth didn't vanish entirely. Hidden accounts from the time suggest Joanna was never truly insane. In fact, she may have been the only sane one in a family drunk on power, willing to sacrifice their own blood to keep it. This is the story of a queen turned captive, a daughter turned political liability, a mother rendered invisible, and a truth buried under centuries of carefully constructed lies. It's a reminder that the most dangerous monsters aren't always strangers. Sometimes, they're the ones we call family. To grasp the full weight of what happened to Joanna, we have to go back to Spain in the late 1400s. A kingdom forged in fire, rising from centuries of warfare and religious conquest. This was a nation on the brink of global dominance, flush with confidence, but also deeply paranoid and rigid in its hierarchies. Royal marriages weren't about love. They were military strategy in disguise. Children weren't nurtured. They were trained for duty. Joanna's parents, Isabella and Ferdinand, were master strategists. Their marriage unified Spain politically, but emotionally, it was built on calculation. They saw tenderness as weakness, and they passed this cold, tactical worldview to their children. From the moment Joanna was born, she wasn't a daughter. She was a diplomatic asset. Her value was measured in alliances, not affection. At the same time, Spain was undergoing a profound transformation. In 1492, the Reconquista culminated with the conquest of Granada, completing the expulsion of Muslim rule from the Iberian Peninsula. That same year, Columbus claimed the New World for Spain. The country was riding a wave of triumphalism and growing increasingly intolerant of dissent or deviation. In this environment, loyalty to the crown trumped everything, including family. Joanna's education reflected this harsh reality. She was taught music, languages, and courtly manners, skills befitting a future queen. But just as importantly, She was schooled in the brutal mechanics of power. She learned that treaties were temporary, alliances fickle, and family ties expendable if they clashed with national interest. Sadly, those lessons would become her life's bitter truth. The Castilian court was a nest of intrigue. Plots, betrayals, and bribes were standard fare. Trust was a luxury that could cost you your life. Joanna learned early on to guard her thoughts and emotions. Ironically, this wariness, an asset in any prince, was later twisted into evidence of her supposed madness. As she grew older, Joanna showed signs of a mind that was sharp, curious, and independent. Qualities that, in a son, might have earned praise, but in a daughter were dangerous. She challenged her tutors. She asked bold questions about policy. She was interested in governance. For Isabella and Ferdinand, this was alarming. A future queen was supposed to be obedient, not opinionated. When Joanna began to express her own ideas, especially when they clashed with her parents, those moments weren't seen as youthful assertiveness. Instead, they were filed away as symptoms. Brick by brick, the narrative of her madness was being laid, even before she came of age. In 1496, when Joanna was just 17, her parents announced her marriage to Philip of Habsburg, better known as Philip the Handsome. The match was a diplomatic masterstroke. It was designed to encircle France with Habsburg allies and tilt the balance of European power. For Isabella and Ferdinand, it was brilliant politics. For Joanna, it was the beginning of a nightmare. Philip was everything the Renaissance court admired. Tall, charismatic, heir to the Netherlands and the Holy Roman Empire. But behind the good looks was a man who was selfish, cunning, and cruel. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a pawn, and Joanna was his. Her journey to the Netherlands, surrounded by royal finery and hope, would be her last real taste of freedom. Contemporary accounts describe her as poised, intelligent, multilingual, and well-loved by those who met her. She wasn't some unstable figure in a tragic romance. She was a competent, prepared woman stepping into her destiny. Their wedding was a spectacle of dynastic theater. She wore the finest Spanish silks. Philip gleamed in Habsburg splendor, and the court was filled with nobles celebrating the union of two major European houses. On the surface, it was a fairy tale. Behind the scenes, tragedy loomed. Philip had goals: power, wealth, and control. He didn't care about Joanna's voice, her ideas, or her well-being. His charm, the same charm that wooed Europe, was a weapon, and he used it with precision. At first, Joanna loved him deeply. That devotion, ironically, would be used to discredit her. In royal protocol, passion in a queen wasn't endearing. It was destabilizing. And the more she loved Philip, the more unbalanced she appeared to those watching. At first, things seemed to go well. Joanna adjusted quickly to life in the Netherlands. She learned the customs, gave birth to their first child, Eleanor, in 1498, and took steps to prepare for eventual rule. But beneath the surface, Philip had already begun a calculated campaign to destroy her. He cheated on her openly, flaunted his mistresses, and ensured Joanna heard about every betrayal. It wasn't just personal cruelty, it was political strategy. A humiliated wife, especially one deeply in love, would be easier to break. The court, which once admired her, began whispering behind closed doors. Her emotional reactions, entirely human responses to a cheating husband, were rebranded as hysterical or unstable. The trap was tightening, and Philip was just getting started. Philip's campaign of control didn't rely on brute force. It was more subtle and far more dangerous. He kept Joanna emotionally unsteady by alternating between coldness and charm. One day he'd show her affection. The next he'd isolate her or deny her access to court matters. This constant seesaw left her confused, anxious, and desperate to regain his attention. It was psychological warfare dressed in velvet and smiles. Worse still, he began isolating her from her Spanish attendants, the only people at court loyal to her. In their place, he surrounded her with his own allies, people who fed her misinformation, questioned her decisions, and encouraged her to doubt herself. Her environment became one of whispered judgments and staged betrayals, carefully designed to make her seem irrational to anyone watching. And when she did lash out, when she cried, shouted, or demanded respect, it was labeled as more proof of madness. Even her children became tools in Philip's plan. Between 1498 and 1507, Joanna gave birth to 6 children: Eleanor, Charles, Isabella, Ferdinand, Mary, and Catherine. Each child should have strengthened her position as queen and mother. But Philip weaponized them. He used the threat of separating her from them to manipulate her behavior and ensured they were raised with loyalty to him, not to her. Observers outside Philip's inner circle noticed something strange. Joanna only seemed mad when reacting to specific provocations: his affairs, his gaslighting, his humiliations. But when she was involved in matters of governance or intellectual discussion, she was calm, articulate, and highly capable. This pattern raised quiet suspicions about the truth of her condition. Still, the myth of her instability spread, whispered in corridors, echoed in diplomatic letters, and repeated in royal courts across Europe. By 1504, that myth had taken on a life of its own. Her reputation was sealed. Even people who had never met her accepted the idea that she was unfit to rule, and that was precisely what Philip wanted. But then, a new political opportunity arrived, one that would change everything. Queen Isabella, Joanna's mother, died that year. Isabella's death should have marked Joanna's ascension as Queen of Castile. It was what she had been groomed for since childhood, and her mother's will explicitly named her the rightful heir. But there was a catch, a single clause that would become the perfect tool for her political enemies. Isabella's testament stated that if Joanna was unable or unwilling to rule, her father Ferdinand would serve as regent until her son Charles came of age. It was likely written as a precaution, not an indictment. But in the hands of Ferdinand and Philip, it became a weapon. The term unable was stretched beyond recognition. Every tear, every argument, every moment of emotion was twisted into evidence of incapacity. Ferdinand's ambitions surfaced immediately. Instead of supporting his daughter, he moved swiftly to regain control over Castile. He reignited rumors about her mental state, painting her as hysterical and irrational, unfit to govern. Her grief over Isabella's death and her fury at Philip's continued betrayal were recast as signs of dangerous instability. Philip saw his chance too. He started calling himself Philip I of Castile, asserting that as Joanna's husband, the crown should pass through her to him. But Joanna, for all the manipulation she had endured, refused to give up her birthright. She resisted, and in the twisted logic of the court, that resistance was portrayed as further proof of her madness. Because if she were truly sane, the argument went, why wouldn't she hand power to her father or husband? It was a classic no-win scenario. If she asserted her authority, she was mad. If she stayed silent, she was unfit. Every move she made tightened the snare. What lay beneath all of this, of course, was the simple truth that neither Ferdinand nor Philip wanted a female monarch with real power. And European rulers, watching the Spanish crisis unfold, recognized something familiar. A convenient model for sidelining a woman whose authority threatened the status quo. Behind the scenes, a massive propaganda machine roared to life. Tales of Joanna's erratic behavior spread like wildfire. She was said to refuse food, sleep on the floor, and wander aimlessly for hours. Some of it may have been true. She was in mourning and under relentless stress. But much of it was exaggerated or entirely fabricated. In the echo chambers of court gossip, fiction quickly became fact. Then, in 1506, everything changed again. Philip the Handsome died suddenly at just 28 years old, officially from typhoid fever, though rumors of poison spread immediately. His death might have been Joanna's moment to reclaim her role. Instead, it sealed her fate. Her reaction to Philip's death, overwhelming grief, clinging to his body, and accompanying his coffin on a long journey to Granada, was held up as the ultimate proof of her insanity. Contemporary writers claimed she kept the corpse near her, opened the casket at night, even kissed his lifeless face. The stories grew wilder with every retelling. A woman devastated by the death of her manipulative husband became, in legend, a queen who had lost all sense of reality. But the truth was far less sensational. Yes, she grieved, and yes, she likely insisted on traveling with the body, partly out of devotion, partly out of fear that Philip's allies would steal it and stage a burial to shift public sentiment. In another context, her actions might have been seen as honorable. In this one, they were painted as deranged. Ferdinand wasted no time. He stepped in as protector of his daughter and the kingdom. The regency that had once been described as temporary was extended indefinitely. Joanna, the legitimate queen, became a powerless figurehead, if that. Her father's control over Castile was complete. Foreign powers that had once negotiated with her directly now addressed their letters to the unfortunate daughter of King Ferdinand. She was removed from court, her access to decision-making severed. Even her attempts to govern or appear in public were twisted into signs of delusion. If she acted like a queen, it was because she thought she still was one, and that, they claimed, was madness. Every action she took was interpreted through a lens of mental illness. If she showed sadness, it was pathological. If she showed strength, it was dangerous. If she did nothing, it was proof she had given up. There was no escape. The most tragic part? The image of Joanna as the Mad Queen still dominates popular history. Generations of scholars repeated the same narratives, that she was emotionally unstable, obsessively in love, incapable of governing. But modern research has uncovered a different story, one of a woman systematically dismantled by a patriarchal machine, a queen who dared to think and feel, and who was punished for both. By 1509, Ferdinand had such a firm grip on Castile that Joanna's title was meaningless. She was a queen in name only. And soon, even that illusion would be erased. By the spring of 1509, the facade of Joanna's reign had completely crumbled. Her father Ferdinand, ruling as regent, no longer even needed to pretend she held real authority. He had reduced her status to that of a royal prisoner. Not officially, of course. There were no formal charges, no trial, no declaration of unfitness. That would have required evidence. Instead, he relied on public perception, court gossip, and endless whispers of her instability to justify locking her away from the world. The place chosen for Joanna's quiet disappearance was Tordesillas, a remote castle beside the Duero River. Cold, damp, and removed from politics, It was the perfect place to erase a queen. The woman who had once been poised to rule a vast empire now lived in a decaying fortress, cut off from her children, stripped of her dignity, and watched around the clock. It was not a prison in name, but in every way that mattered, it was one. She wasn't allowed to travel. She couldn't freely communicate. Her attendants were rotated frequently to prevent loyalty from forming, and many were instructed to report on her words and behavior. Those closest to her, including some of the few servants who cared for her well-being, were dismissed or reassigned. As the years dragged on, her world shrank further, until her days consisted of little more than prayers, silence, and staring through barred windows. And yet, even in confinement, Joanna was not truly broken. Reports from those who met her in Tordesillas, especially foreign dignitaries or sympathetic Spanish courtiers, described a woman who was quiet and melancholy. Yes, but also alert, articulate, and deeply aware of her surroundings. She continued to show interest in theology, state affairs, and the well-being of her children. These moments of lucidity were ignored by those in power. They didn't fit the narrative. Ferdinand ruled Castile until his death in 1516. With his passing, Joanna might have been expected to regain some degree of autonomy. After all, she was still technically the rightful queen. But by then, her political value had been entirely transferred to her son, Charles. Charles was only 16 when Ferdinand died, and though young, he had been raised with a clear mission: rule as emperor. His education, overseen by the powerful Habsburg court, had ensured that he saw Spain as his inheritance, not his mother's. The idea that Joanna might want to rule herself, or even act as a co-monarch, was inconvenient at best. At worst, it was dangerous. And so, the cycle of betrayal continued. Charles came to Spain in 1517. It was his first time setting foot in the country his mother was born to rule. One of his earliest acts was to visit her in Tordesillas. The meeting, heavily guarded and carefully staged, was a political performance. Contemporary accounts say Joanna greeted him warmly. She recognized him immediately, embraced him, and asked after his health and studies. There was no trace of delusion or madness, only a mother seeing her son for the first time in years. But Charles left the meeting with his mind already made up. His mother was to remain where she was. Some historians believe this decision was made for political expediency. Charles was young and still consolidating power. Freeing Joanna would have invited chaos. Loyalists might rally behind her, or worse, question his own legitimacy. The easiest path forward was to leave her in Tordesillas, under the continued supervision of hand-picked guards and a rotating staff that reported solely to the crown. And so, the door remained closed. For nearly 4 more decades. Over the years, Joanna faded from public view entirely. Her name was no longer mentioned in court announcements. Her signature disappeared from royal decrees. She was never officially deposed, never formally diagnosed, never granted the dignity of a defense. She simply stopped existing in the eyes of power. Yet even in this forced obscurity, Joanna remained a symbol. Among the Spanish people, rumors persisted. Some whispered that she had been wrongfully imprisoned. Others that she still prayed daily for the chance to rule. In the villages near Tordesillas, the locals referred to her as La Reina, the Queen, not with scorn, but with quiet reverence. As she aged, her health declined. She suffered from arthritis, chronic pain, and increasing frailty. But her mind, according to the rare few who saw her, remained intact. Even in her 70s, she remembered details of policy, history, and faith with clarity. But the world outside her castle had moved on. In 1555, after 46 years of confinement, Joanna of Castile died quietly at the age of 75. There were no grand funeral processions, no royal declarations of mourning. Her body was eventually interred alongside her husband Philip in the Royal Chapel of Granada, next to the man whose betrayals had destroyed her life. It was a cruel irony. In death, she was reunited with the man who had orchestrated the beginning of her downfall. History would remember her by a name she never asked for: Joanna the Mad. That label, once whispered in political circles to justify a power grab, became the shorthand for her entire existence. For centuries, textbooks reduced her to a tragic footnote, a mentally unstable queen too emotional to rule. But in recent decades, historians have begun to re-examine her story. Through surviving letters, personal accounts, and court records, a different portrait emerges. Not of a madwoman, but of a woman trapped by power, betrayed by family, and condemned by a society that refused to allow her the authority she was born to wield. Her so-called madness, viewed in the light of modern psychology and politics, looks less like illness and more like grief. Grief for her stolen legacy, for her children raised to doubt her, for the crown she was never allowed to wear with pride. Joanna of Castile wasn't mad. She was isolated, manipulated, and broken by design. Her insanity was a tool used by those who feared what she represented. A capable, assertive woman in a world that demanded obedience or silence from queens. The legacy of her imprisonment offers a chilling lesson, even now. Because the weapons used against Joanna, gaslighting, discrediting, confinement, rewriting truth, are still used today. Not always by kings, but by institutions, governments, and families that prioritize control over compassion. Her story isn't just a dark chapter in royal history, it's a mirror, held up to power, to patriarchy, and to the quiet violence that so often hides behind the mask of care. Joanna was born a queen. She died a prisoner. But her truth is stronger than the lies that buried her. And now, finally, her voice is being heard.